What's going on, good people? I wanted to talk about how to pick a solar panel. I hope audio is coming through. If anybody's around, because this one was short notice, let me know. I got a couple questions over the last couple months or so, and the questions always get asked about what? Oh, it's right here. Excuse me for a second. People always ask, can this panel work with my power station? Will it damage it? So on and so forth. Which is a valid question. So I wanted to make an updated video, and I may actually have to make just a video for doing this, but I wanted to talk live about it because that's easier. So you have the Ecoflow River 2 base model that has an 8 amp limit. You have the EB70, the EB3A, the EB55 that all have 8 amp limits. You have even some like the EB120, the EB150, the EB240 that has a 10 amp limit. Amps are an interesting thing to talk about as it relates to your power station, and then we'll start talking about the solar panels in a second. But when you go and you're looking at a potential solar panel for your power station, you have to think about what connection your solar power station has, your power station has. Does it come with that cable that you have, which is typically an MC4 to your respective connection? And there's also a situation where you have to think about the connection, the volts and amps on your power station. So your power station will have a voltage range, and it will typically have an amp limit. Somewhere like 8, 10, 15 is about the highest I've seen on power stations I'm familiar with. But there are some that have really high amp limits. I think the ITEL comes to mind because it can put like 4 or 5 panels in parallel. Maybe even that Bruges RV that can take 600 watts may have a high amp input limit, but typically it's about 15. The reason why amps matter is because the higher your amps go, the thicker your cord needs to be, which is interesting. So typically when power stations have a high amp limit, they have I don't want to say proprietary because it's not that, but they have their own cable that allows you to parallel. So I assume that cable has maybe some fuses in there or a fuse in there. And I assume that little cable or junction box has the proper size cable in there. So volt range on power stations. A lot of people who ask this question are first-time power station purchasers. So they typically have a smaller power station. That range is typically about 12 volts to maybe 28 or 30 volts. 28 is about the normal. Some go up to 30. I think the bull bat that I have goes up to 30 volts. Now, when we're talking about solar panels, a 12-volt solar panel typically sits at about 21 volts, sometimes a little lower, 17, 22, 23. That's kind of rare, but that's what a 12-volt panel is. It typically sits in that range of about 16 to 24 volts. And most of these smaller power stations can only take in those 12-volt panels. You can't take in any higher voltage. There's some implications of that I'm going to talk about a little later, if I remember, right? So then the amp limit or the amps on the panel matter because a lot of people will see, okay, well, I have this panel. Let's say this panel is rated at 17. Let me make sure y'all can hear me. All right, no complaints. What's going on, brother Setite? I saw Nathan, Joe Tyson. Always good to see you guys. A lot of people ask about the amp input and will a panel damage their power station? Now, most new power stations have an amp limit. There are some that don't, but I don't think they make those anymore. When we were first getting into the micro generators, I think 1 or 2 didn't have an amp limitation. So you had to be very careful with that and to not over amp it. But most of them have a limit. Some of them have a hard cap that is really kind of hard to work with, especially when you start thinking about paralleling panels. So you look at a 12-volt panel, sits at about 21 volts, and let's say that yields about 8 to 9 amps. If you have that Ecoflow River 2, that EB3A, that EB55, they have about an 8 to 8.5 amp input limit, and the power station itself will not take in more than that. So you could throw 12 amps at it, 10 amps at it, 11, but it will max out at 8 amps. If you watch any of the EB70 videos, especially some of the earlier ones from the more like technical people, not these like lifestyle channels that just go out and get power and they're happy. No knock on them. I think there's a place for that. It's not a particularly helpful place, but there's a place. Uh, we all kind of notice that 8 amp limit stops you from getting the real 200 watt input, which you'll be hard pressed to find anyway, because the volts times the amps is how you get your wattage. So when people ask me about that Ecoflow River 2, the base model, it's in the same boat as the EB3A, the EB70, and so on and so forth. It has about an 8 amp input limit. So typically what you want to do, especially if you're trying to get closer to the 200 watts, the Ecoflow River 2 can't even take in the 200 watts. So that's a whole nother situation in and of itself. So you kind of don't have to worry about that as much. Somebody asked me today, hey, can I put 200 watts into the Ecoflow River 2? And I'm like, yeah, it's fine. It's a waste of power. But if you're fresh into solar, you're probably going to buy other power stations that will be able to better use that 200 watt panel. So it's okay to buy that. And then on overcast days, you will get better overcast output out of your panel, which is what they call kind of over paneling. It applies to more than overcast days, but I'm not a big fan of over paneling, but that's a whole nother conversation. So once you've identified your amp input limit, you have to start getting strategic, because if you have something that has a hard cap, you probably want to go with a higher voltage panel. So somewhere around the 22, 21 instead of the 16 volts. Now, I made 2 videos about Bourgeois V panels, the 180 and the 200, and both of those panels sit on different spectrums. The 200 watt one has a higher amp output and a lower voltage to achieve its 200 watts. The 180 has a higher voltage threshold or limit, and it has a lower amp output, which is better for these power stations that have 8 amp limits. Because if you start out at a higher voltage, what you'll end up getting is that higher voltage times your 8 amp limit. So instead of having 17, 16, 18 volts at 8 amps, 18 times 8, 17 times 8, you'll be sitting at 19, 20, maybe 21 volts times 8 amps. So you get more power. And that's a difference between, like, if you do 16 versus 21, that's 4 times 8, you know what I mean? Which I think is 32. So that's a whole 32 extra watts you'll get every hour on the hour that your panel is in sun. And, you know, those are fancy ideal situation numbers, but even if it's an extra 20, 30 watts, realistically, that's more power you get every hour. That's why it's important to pick a appropriate panel for the power station that you have. Now, you kind of ideally want to be in a situation where you don't have a power station that has those 8 amp input limits. I'm sure there's some like wire gauge limitations within the device, or maybe the MPPT charge controller that they use in there has certain capacity limits because it's cheaper. I don't know why they go with these 8 amp limits. I'm sure there's some rhyme or reason to it, but you kind of want to get away from that. But I own power stations with 8 amp input limits. I have the EB70 and I have the EB3A. I kind of deal with it. The EB70 was my first big power station at 714 watt hours with a 700 watt inverter. So I just bought a couple panels that always had the higher voltage and lower amps. In the grand scheme of things, it's always ideal, typically, to go with the higher volts in your system versus the lower amps. And this is as it relates to power stations. I don't know about that DIY stuff, if amps makes a difference for you. I think it all has to do with the limitation of your hardware, because it's easier to send voltage longer distances than it is amps. So, which is kind of, well, I don't want I don't want to get too technical there because I'm not an expert. But you think about the EU, they sit at 220 volts. So they can send more power for longer distances because their amps are a lot lower. They're half the amount of amps that we typically have on our 120 volts or 110 or whatever it is we have. Just to get the basics out of the way, we're talking about power stations. You do not need a solar panel with a charge controller on it. I have a playlist called Solar Power for Beginners. If you're a beginner, you should watch those videos. But I talk about power stations and I talk about solar panels, and I go into this in a little bit more detail, but very concise and, to the point, not wasting time and all that jazz. So you can check those out. But you do not need a charge controller. Most panels that are in the rigid frame or whatever, the glass panels, they will have MC4 connectors outside of those Harbor Freights. They have SAE connectors. I don't particularly like SAE connectors because most power stations use MC4 connectors for better or better. So what you have to deal with is possibly changing those out, and you have to change the polarity, or you can adapt them and change them to MC4. But it's typically a good idea to just go with panels that have an MC4 connector. As it relates to folding panels, you have to be intentional about that because most of those folding panels will come with a barrel connector and then a barrel connector to certain adapters. And typically, if you have an Ecoflow power station or a power station that use XT60, like the EB55 or that ITEL, ITEIHL or something like that, they use XT60. And most folding panels, if they don't come with XT60 on them, they don't have an adapter for that. You'll have to adapt it yourself, which can get tricky. It's usually very straightforward, but it can get tricky. So the connection type is really important when you're considering a solar panel. The same thing goes for those folding solar panels. You have to take into consideration the volts. A lot of times those folding panels have a little bit higher volts than glass panels. So they'll be sitting at like 24 sometimes. Some have even been a little higher, 23.3. Some power stations only have a range of about 12 to 24 volts. Jason Noy was talking about in his last video, the Dr. Prepare standalone battery that has that DC hub on it, and it had a 12 to 24 voltage range. And when he went up to like 24.3 on the volts, it stopped charging. I think there's room for them to improve that. The version 2 will probably be a little more robust, but kudos to them for what they did with that battery because it's pretty dope. Let me see what y'all snapping and trapping about. Cell power to okay, yeah, cell power. Setite has a cell power 2500, the big blue, and has a 25 amp input limit. Cycling Tours Antigua. What's going on, man? Good to see you. At the new house right now, to put a DC blanket over the power station. Oh, interesting, man. You should start making shorts. I feel like that would be a good look, actually, now that I think about it. Make shorts about these little things, and that will keep you tight at around 60 seconds. So you have to be intentional. Record a couple versions if you don't get it tight. That's what I do. Sometimes my third one is the one that gets published to you guys. Lee Saint, what do you think about the Ecoflow Delta Pro, please? Okay, we'll get back to that in a second. They build and design these things with a lot of off-the-shelf components, which is why there are common volt and amp limits. Okay, I got that. Yeah, Lee, it's always good to see you, sir. Thanks for hanging out. All right, we talked about amps and volts. Then you have to think about your output. This is kind of like something that doesn't get talked about a lot, but it's something I gleaned from a Renogy panel that I purchased, the Black Division. They were basically saying, hey, you could get about 500 watt hours from a 100 watt panel. And I find that to be typically true as long as you're kind of angled towards the sun. So the reason why I bring that up is because if you want to be strategic, a lot of us bought panels and power stations kind of willy-nilly, myself included. But if you want to be very strategic and intentional, you can think about, okay, if a 100 watt panel can produce on average 500 watt hours of power or half a kilowatt, what kind of power station should I buy to pair with that panel? And I'm not saying we go around buying panels first, because that's not necessarily how it goes, because a power station in and of itself can always be plugged into the wall to provide power when we need it during emergencies and power outages. So we typically get the power station first. But think about that. You got the River 2 base model, 256 watt hours of power. If you wanted to pair it with a panel without taking use into mind, then maybe like a 60-watt panel would be ideal for that, to have it sit out in the sun all day while you're at work, you're away, you're gone. It'll probably be full by the time you get home. Something to think about. Now, that doesn't take into account what a lot of us do with these panels, which is to use them while we're also getting power. But that's not everybody's situation. I know quite a few people who have power stations and they sit full for days on end, for months on end, because they have a 9 to 5 that they have to go to, and they're not typically at home. The pandemic was a whole different situation, but life is kind of like ebb and flowing back to normal in some capacity. Luckily, I get to hang around my house a lot and manage my power stations and actually use the power. So I don't need a perfect watt hour to watt hour capacity panel power station production scenario. I like to be able to use that power and store some. So you think about a 100-watt panel, that would probably pair better with something that was like around 500 watt hours, like your EB55. There's not a whole lot of devices in the 500 watt hour department these days that I would recommend. There's the EB55, the antiquated Jackery 500. You got, I think the Oops is still around. The Big Blue, I would avoid if it's still around. I don't think it is. They say that they were going to update it and put it out, but we'll see. They could have just been blowing smoke. That is what would pair well with a 100-watt panel. Think about that for a second. You got devices like the GoLabs R300, which I have one sitting right here. This charges at 60 watts from solar. So when you think about that, they really had this capacity in mind as it relates to what kind of panel would pair well for this. But this one has pass-through, AC pass-through. So when you're charging, you can use AC as well. So it would be better if that could take in about 100 watts, because then you could use some and store some. What I mean by that is this. If you know a 100-watt panel could produce about 500 watt hours, you don't have a 500 watt hour capacity power station, you would essentially halfway through the day get your power station full, unless you were using about half that power to power a load. Hopefully that makes sense. For the people who are watching, I'm sure it does, but there are people who may watch this later who are new to solar that could give them some insight. So I don't like full power stations. So in me being intentional about this stuff, I'm starting to take a lot of that stuff into consideration. I'll give you an example. There's a potential for me to get a bigger power station that could take in more volts from my solar panels. I have 4 about 190 solar panels. Let's just call them 200 for the sake of simplicity. I have 2 in series, because the power stations that they're connected to cannot take in more than 50 volts. They are 12-volt panels. So it's about 20 volts, 40 volts. The power station is capped at 50, so I can't go any higher. If I get that other power station, which has a range of 145, which a lot of the more capable power stations have, I can put all 4 of these in series, 20, 40, 60, 80, well within the room of that power station. So those panels will all go into that one power station. And then I have my Renogy 320 watt still, which at the moment is giving power to a singular Dr. Prepare or ampere time battery. I have 2 Dr. Prepares, 1 ampere time. Those are 1280 watt hour capacity batteries. So if a 200 watt panel, so if we just toss this out for a second, a 100 watt panel will give you 500 watt hours. A 200 watt panel over the course of the day will give you about 1,000 watt hours or a kilowatt. I have a 300 watt panel, so that would beg to reason that it'll give you somewhere around 1.5. And I have experienced this where if I don't monitor that battery that's on that MPPT charge controller from PowerWorks, which is being charged by our Renogy 320 watt solar panel, if I don't monitor it, I'll go downstairs and it'll be full. So it's not a good pairing. It's not a good pairing at all. So what I've been thinking about is if that other power station does come into play, I would use one of my other larger power stations. I have an Ace Volt and an Alcatel to possibly put on that 320 watt panel. Or the EB120 would be a good pairing because it's 1.2 kilowatt hours. It's not perfect, but it's better than the batteries in some capacity because they're about the same capacity, to be honest. 1.2 is about 1200 watts. The batteries are 12 volts by 100 amp hours, or 12 volts by 100 amps, or whatever you want to call it. So it comes out about to about 1280 because it's not 12 volts flat. It's like 12.3 or 12.4 or something like that. So actually, the EB150, the EB120 would not be a good pairing. For some reason in my mind, I thought I had a 150, but not really, because I'm very well aware of what it is. But I just thought it was a 1.5 situation where it's actually a 1.2 or 1200 watt hour capacity battery. So it actually would not be a good situation to put it on that. What I will probably end up doing is putting that Renogy panel on the Alcatel or the Ace Volt, and that'll be a better pairing because as my systems grow, as your systems grow, if you take all of this information into account, you have to take into account that, well, I shouldn't say you have to. I don't like full power stations. So I want to match my panels well with my power stations. And you should too. All right. Hey, Sharp Made. Good to see you. What do we have here? Have you ever thought about building an adjustable platform out of wood to put your panels on? No, I have not. Well, it's crossed my mind. I don't like building. I don't want to build. I actually saw somebody had something that was like rolling. It had some very robust wheels on it. Jason Noy built one on his channel for his panels. I thought his wheels were a little lightweight, but his grass, with my situation, my grass is out of control. So I like those bigger wheels that I saw in somebody's stuff. And I don't have a whole lot of space for that. I feel like it would to build something. I don't know. I don't like the idea of, if I had the space, I would entertain trying to build something, but I probably wouldn't because I don't like building stuff. All right, let's take a break a second and go back to this question from, I think, Lee, about the Lee Saint. What do you think about the Ecoflow Delta Pro, please? So I just had, before the AC 300 came out, it was the one I was most impressed with. And if I had the money when that Kickstarter price was announced on that Delta Pro, I probably would have bought one because it was a very impressive device. I'm not crazy about the battery situation. I don't think I would buy batteries for these power stations, but I think there's a specific, or there's varying use cases for that I don't quite have yet. Being able to store power, I probably will change my tune in the future as, transfer switches and things come into place, because to run your loads longer is important. If you have the ability to power that load, and with the AC300 having two MPPT charge controllers, I think that it is a very realistic scenario where having more power coming into those dips is ideal. Let me sit there for a second. Just humor me. With it having those two MPPTs on it, or another power station like the AC200 Max or the AC200P having the ability to get that DC optimizer, what I'm trying to do around here these days is consolidate my cables, and to have multiple power stations, which is my preference, to have them in different zones, but to have multiple power stations in the same zone, I could see myself thinking, okay, I don't need two power stations down here with two sets of cables coming into them, two sets of panels coming into them. I could probably say, let me build a big enough array. I'm entertaining that now, with the 800 watt array that I'm trying to consolidate when I have the device that can take it. If I could build a big enough array that could provide the power, I probably could see myself leaning towards a battery for simplicity. But even still, I like the idea of taking all of that power coming into a power station and just charging the other power station from that one. That way, that power station is not just a battery. Back to the Delta Pro, those batteries are dumb batteries. They have no capacity, no ability to be used without the main power station. I think that that's silly. I feel like Ecoflow should remediate that quickly. ASAP Ferg. What you making noises for? Huh? Oh, my wife agrees. So you know I must be on to something. She agrees with me often enough. I don't want to put it out there like she disagrees with me a lot. All right. Three Blue Dragons, what's happening? Okay. Did I answer this? Yeah, we talked about that. Maybe. I don't know. Good to see you. Hey, MJ. I just walked from I just walked from the stove. I'm so glad I caught the line. That's funny that you said stove. That's how we say it in the NO. Back to the panels. All right. Now another thing we have to delve into. It's like we've talked about this idea of matching your panels with your power stations, which is ideal. I think that that's very thoughtful to consider that kind of stuff. Um, then you come into the situation where it gets a little more involved, a little more complicated, where you have to think about series and parallel and what kind of options you have there. Most small power stations will not have the ability to take series connections, but they can take parallel. The reason why is because series has to do with your voltage, parallel has to do with your amps. When you parallel a panel together or panels together, it combines the amps. In most of these smaller power stations, you're probably only going to be able to get away with maybe putting two in parallel, maybe three. I say this all the time. I've been told by Will Prowse and Armand Allen that if you go around the 15 amps, which is if you have a 100-watt panel, you parallel three of those, 5, 5, and 5, because again, it's a 20-volt panel, 5 amps to get the 100. You got 15 amps going there. Then once you get to a point where you're dealing with 15 amps, you have to think about your cable size. I haven't become resolute on what the ideal cable size is because Armand Allen was telling me that typically with amps, you don't ever want to run them for a longer time. Some other people have mentioned this past their 80% capacity. I don't know enough about the cables to speak to that right now, but I will tell you this. I have really enjoyed using 12 gauge cables instead of 10 gauge cables. My thoughts before were misguided because I always bought 10 gauge cables. But when you're dealing with the difference of like 14 to 10 to, I'm sorry, 14 to 12 to 10, the wire gauge gets bigger as the number gets smaller. I defaulted to 10 gauge, which was overkill. I mean, my first power station was a Bowden's, maxes out at like 45 watts of power. I put a 100-watt panel on it just to make sure that I didn't have to worry about the angle. I will always be getting full power. I bought a 10 gauge extension for that dip, which was completely unnecessary. A 100-watt panel at best will use 5 amps. I think 10 gauge is rated for like 40 amps, 30 amps if I'm being too generous. I think 12 gauge is rated for 30 or 20. Hopefully that makes sense. So you look at it, let's say the 12 gauge, I had a image around here somewhere. Let me see if I can find it. If someone is astute enough to make sense of that for me, please feel free to drop a comment. But I had an HQST cable I kept around because it showed me the gauge and the amps that it was rated at. I'm sure I saved that freaking joint. Let me see here. Okay, yeah, it's right here. Boom, right on my bookmark bar. Just give me 1 second. Let me read this description because further down it tells me what the. I'm gonna show it to you real quick. Let's present briefly. Share screen. Okay. Screen 2. Boom dizzle, ha kizzle. Bring it up. Bring it up. Bring it up. Bring it up. Let's just drop me off a second. So you can see 10 gauge, 5.26 millimeters or whatever it is, millimeters squared. 10 gauge is rated at 30 amps, right? 12 gauge is rated at 20 amps. You got to put, as far as 100 watt panels, you have to put 4 of those in parallel to reach that max because they're typically 5 amps a piece. Now with 200 watt panels, it gets interesting, right? You start putting those in parallel, those dips are typically 10 amps. And as we talked about earlier, if your voltage is lower, your amps are typically higher. So you could have a 200 watt panel rated at 12 amps, 13, 14, 13.5 amps open circuit, 12, 11 something once you put a load on it. You with me? So you start to put a 10 amp panel in parallel. 10 plus 10 is 20. You really need to take into consideration what you're doing with these amps joints. But I've never put, and I've only just recently thought about putting some panels in parallel because I have the 180, the 190s, let's just call them 190s. I have the 190s going across my backyard. 2 are in series, 2 are in series. I actually thought about, for the sake of consolidating cables, putting 2 of them in series, 2 of them in series, and then combining those in parallel, which would give me a 40 volt, 20 amp array, I believe. Yeah. So I don't even know if 10 gauge would probably be ideal for that. The length matters as well. Thanks to the good brother B3 Outdoors, he shared with me that Renogy has a calculator on their site. I wonder if I could find that link and drop it. I'll put the link to the calculator in the description because I don't know exactly where it is right now. Renogy has a calculator where you tell it, okay, this how many volts, this many amps, I believe, this is how long in feet, and then they have like a degree by which you're willing to deal with some plus and minus and loss. I forget what that was. But if you put it in, it'll tell you how long your cable can be and how many what gauge it needs to be. Super useful tool. So typically I'm going with 12 gauge for everything now because I'm more so into seriesing, connecting panels in series than connecting them in parallel. But I was entertaining putting them in parallel to be able to get all of my power into one power station so that I could not have 2 cables coming into the joint. And I actually thought about that again because an interesting thing about series and parallel is series will take and treat all your panels as one panel. Doing a series parallel connection will give you 2 panels that don't it gives you 2 arrays that can kind of coexist together, but if one has shade on it, the other one can still produce power. So I thought about that because as my 4 panels lay out earlier in the day, these 2 panels closest to my house get sun on them, but these 2 panels take a little bit of a while to get sun on them. If I have all those in series, this panel is dead in the water until all of them are in complete sun. So I thought about putting series parallel. That way this panel can produce its 250, 200 watts for the time that it gets sun on it. And then after about an hour or 2 or however long it takes the sun to move, this panel array will come online and start putting in 400 into this one big power station. I thought about that. But then in that situation, like I said, 40 volts at 20 amps, my 10 gauge cable will probably be very necessary. But if you're doing a 100 watt panel, because those things are at 5 amps, you can get away with connecting 3 of those in parallel. I would say no problem. But some people have said you should start thinking about fuses. And there are MC4 inline fuses. You just have to buy them and put them wherever fuses go. That's the reason why I don't like fuses, because I don't know much about them. Let's see. A lot of blue here. All right, cool. Y'all just chatting. Back to the lecture at hand. So we kind of delved into the cables a little bit there as well. I hope that made sense. Let's take a real life scenario and kind of map it out a bit. So let's say you bought that Ecoflow River 2, the base model, or you have the first Ecoflow River. The good thing, quick deviation, the good thing about this new River 2 series is that the base model is very typical. It has an 8 amp input limit. So in some ways, it's a step back from the previous River, because the previous River series, the first one, I think the amp input limit is like 12. So you don't have these issues. You can buy whatever panel you want for your Ecoflow River. But you take that River 2 base model, 8 amp limit, typical range. I have the thumbnail around. I have thumbnail image. I have the image around here somewhere. Let me look in here so I could just say some direct numbers instead of going off the top of my head. All right. River 2 specs are as follows. We have the voltage range for solar input is 11 to 30. So that's pretty cool. I like that it's 30 and not 28 or anything like that, with an 8 amp max input limit. So you take that, you can do 12 volt panels. Let's say you buy your first panel is a 100 watt panel. You get addicted, as we all do. You get like a Renogy, an HUST, or a Bouge RV, 100 watts. That's 12 volts at about 5 amps to get you your 100 watts. You're like, man, getting this 70 watts from this panel is dope. Let me go ahead and spend another $100. What you would have to do on that one is you would have to buy a parallel cable. My favorite parallel cable that I grab is from Bouge RV. It is not the little adapter one. I prefer the cable. It's about this long because it gives you a little more wiggle room. The adapters are very tight. They give you less wiggle room to connect your panels together. So in that situation, you have two 100 watt panels in parallel. Parallel combines the amps. So you have like a 20 volt by 10 amp array. Go back to the, where is it? If you go back to this idea of the gauge, you got a 20 volt, 10 amp array. 12 gauge is fine for that. Even in some cases, you could probably get away with 14 gauge if your cable was really small, short. I don't know what 14 gauge is rated for. I imagine it's probably maybe like 15 amps. But then I was told that you don't want to exceed 80% for an extended period of time on most cables. So I think 12 gauge is kind of like the perfect gauge for most people. You don't need 10 gauge, which was, I bought a lot of 10 gauge cables and they're a little bit of a pain to work with. Now, just to be honest, as if I'm not always honest, 10 gauge is good because, just to be frank, thank you, or candid. Frank. Okay, I'm Frank. Just to be frank, 10 gauge cables, they lay better because they're thicker. These 12 gauge cables, they willy-nilly all over the place. You got to really like stretch them out and then like lay them down and hope they don't coil up. I have a situation right now where I have a 50-foot 12 gauge cable and I trip over it a lot in my driveway. Which is annoying because then you have an issue pulling one of your cables out. I've done that before, not because I tripped, but because I was just messing around with a cable all flim-flammy. I hope my thumb is not stuck. So 12 gauge cables, they're a little unruly, but they're more easy to move around. 10 gauge cables are a lot more like they just lay there. They're good. You put them in a certain range, they lay flat for the most part, and they don't like get all willy-nilly around, but they're a little harder to manage. So if you have a situation where, it works out fine for most of my panels because most of my panels don't move, but I love having that 12 gauge cable on panels that I have to move around because it's a lot more easy to manage them. Boom, dizzle, hot killer. Let's see. Hey, Miss Beverly, good to see you. Where you been? Cat Eyes, what's happening? Okay, let me see. Where does 20 volts come from with the 12 volt panels in parallel? So 12 volts is a range. It just is what it is. I don't know why. I don't pretend to know why. But when people say something is 12 volts, it typically sits at about 11, maybe a little lower, up to 24, 25 volts. Don't quote me on those numbers, but it's a range. And then when you hear people talk about 24 volt panels, those panels are not, which is confusing, right? Because a 12 volt panel can go up to about 23, 24 volts, or a 12 volt device. Let's just keep it loose. Then when you have a 24 volt device, they typically, if we're dealing with panels, they typically sit at about 40 volts. So the voltages are a range. It just is what it is. I mean, you just gonna have to accept it, whether it makes sense or not. So I answered that. Oh, okay. The real life scenarios. I'm on the fence and looking into Ecoflow Mini or Delta. I don't know yet. Don't buy the Mini. You just got to get the Pro. There's no reason to buy anything else but the Pro until they start putting LFP in all of their various like Delta, Delta Max, Delta Mini. The Delta Pro is the one to buy. Now, if when they were all lithium ion or NMC or whatever NCM, excuse me, then you could kind of, be like, okay, the Delta Max has 1300 watt hours. The Mini has 11 or 800 watt hours. The OG Delta had 1280. You could kind of like debate, and then one had app control, one didn't. It was a little confusing. I never tried to wrap my mind around it, but it is a little confusing about which to get and which to not get. But in this situation, it's like $8.99. The dip, even when it's $9.99, $1 per watt for lithium iron phosphate. Uh, there is no competition for that dip at the $1,000 point, especially from the big three. Blue Eddy doesn't have a 1,000 watt hour. They have the EB150, which is about the same price, but it's not LiFePO. It has those automotive cells that are rated at about 1,000 cycles, but it ain't LiFePO, and it's dated. It only has a 45 watt USB-C PD port, and it only has a 1,000 watt inverter. The Delta 2 has an 1,800 watt inverter. It can take in up to 50 volts, which is, it works. And it has 1,000 watt hour capacity. So it's the way to go. There's no other situation you should be considering. Not at all. We'll ask. I have the AC300, the AC200 Max with the extra EB30 battery. Interesting. I don't know what the EB30 battery is. I have two 120 fold-up panels and one 200 panel. How can I put them together to get 440 watts? I know that I won't get the 440 how to connect. You have two 110s and one 200. So what you're looking at is a situation where you probably have, let's just use the example of you have well, tell me, what kind of 200 watt panel do you have? Let's just try and be as specific as possible. And then let me give you a generic situation. So I have I'll talk about my situation. Let's say I have one Rich Solar 200 watt panel, two Renogy 100 watt panels. How can I hook those together? I actually talk about it in my series in parallel video. I don't know if I did a good job of explaining it visually, but I thought I did a great job explaining it audibly or verbally. So you have one 100 watt panel, which is typically about 20 volts, 5 amps. What you want to do is put those panels in parallel, which means you're going to have 20 volts, 10 amps. And then on that 200 watt Rich Solar, it's 20 volts, 10 amps. We're just going to keep it kind of simple. And then you put those in parallel. You don't have to do anything to the 200 watt. And you say you have an AC300, you could connect those in series then. And then what they'll end up being is a 40 volt, 10 amp array. And I literally gave that example in the series in parallel video that I did. So again, two 100-watt panels, which are rated at 20 volts, 5 amps, one 200-watt panel, which is rated at 20 volts, 10 amps, right? You have to make them match. You have to find some type of equilibrium. So you want to get the two 100-watt panels up to 10 amps, 20 volts, because this 200-watt panel is 20 volts, 10 amps. Then they pair together. You put them in series. Series is going to combine the voltage. The amps is going to stay the same, both at 10 amps. Combine the voltage in series. Then on your AC300, you have a 40-volt, 10 amp array at about 400 watts. I think that's a good look. Black Plumber, what's happening, man? How you doing? It's been a minute. The extra battery to the AC200 Max. Ecoflow River Pro extra battery, 700 watts, is on sale at Academy Sports. I wanted to say Academy. Public school, man. You know what you gonna do. I hope to get that next week. Two 100-watt fold-up Blue Eddies. Yeah, that gets interesting. And one 200-watt folding panel. Let me tell you why that gets very interesting, cat eyes. So extra 10 amp. So get 10 extra. So get extra 10 AP, I guess, gauge. Core, thanks so much. What you have to be careful with folding panels and rigid panels is they will try to find, well, panels in general, they will try to find an equilibrium. So you have to make sure that you're angling all of them very well, or very comparable at least, because they will try to find an equilibrium. And then you also have to be mindful of the fact that once you put those panels in series, they are now operating as one panel. So if your one of your folding panels falls down because the wind blows it, then your array is pretty much shot. If one of your panels puts shadow on the other panel at a certain time of the day because you have to configure them in such a way because they're folding panels, then your array is going to be shot. Is there another way you could do that? Probably. I don't know if you're supposed to put those 120-watt panels in series. Some companies say not to, and I never try to speak on that because I don't own all panels, so I don't know. But let's just say you put the 120s in series. They're probably like 25 volts. So you get up to 50 volts. Yeah, that won't work. Yeah, you can't go series in any capacity there at the first level, because then it won't match. And the 200-watt panel, which is a 20 volt, I mean, it'll just make it'll make your 40 it'll make your 40 volt or 50 volt array. It'll find the equilibrium between that to make it them essentially making them both 20 volt arrays. I hope that makes sense. Yeah, so there's no other way. Set tight if you're still around. I think my brain is on the right path, but it could work. It certainly could work. You just have to be mindful of it, but it could certainly work. Now, you said you had the AC200 Max. Oh, and here's the interesting thing, just to tell you why. Let's say you wanted to entertain putting them all in parallel. So paralleling 3 panels, you would have a 25 volt, what would be the amps on that? You say that 120 is like 4 amps. 25 volt, 4 amps, 25 volt, 4 amps, 20 volts, 4 amps, because it'll try to find an equilibrium. So that being a 10 amp panel, 8 amp panel, 11 amp panel amongst 4 amp panels, they'll equalize in some capacity. I don't know if they'll find the least common denominator, or they'll just kind of try and find some happy ballpark where you're just sitting at about 4 or something amps. I did a test recently, but I don't know if I messed around with the amps. It was more sort of series I was complaining about. But that's what it does. It essentially makes your 200-watt panel into a 100-watt panel. And at that point, there's no point in messing around with that, because you lose out on 100 watts, I suppose. but I wouldn't want to do that anyway. What's up, ban everything? Now, I, let me make sure I've covered all that because I want to make sure I have a complete thought here as it relates to timestamps and such. Yeah, I think we're good. We're good. Just to recap, as it relates to your power station, you want to identify your power station's volt range and amp limit before you pick a panel. You want to think about the connection type, right? You also want to think about, as it relates to the panel, you want it to have, you don't want it to have a charge controller because your power station has a charge controller built in. You need to be mindful of that panel's amps and volts. How much output, I don't think I talked about this. You want to know how much output it has when it's tilted versus flat. You don't need to know that per se, but I think it's just something to be aware of because it could be like I have a situation where I flat deploy panels all the time. It's not ideal, but you still get power. It's not the worst case scenario. Connection type on the panels, rigid versus folding. I typically have a rigid mindset. I don't think about folding panels a whole lot, and most rigid panels will come with MC4. You have to think about series and parallel options for the future, right? Because if you have a smaller power station now, you typically can't do series. But in the future, you could have a bigger one, and then you think about how you can connect those panels together in series parallel connections to be able to maximize on your particular power station situation. Series is typically better, at least in my experience. I haven't been exposed to any logic where parallel is better. I know that, like I said, it typically has to do with the limitations of your device. So you may have to go parallel in some capacity because your device can't take in as much series voltage because you have a number of panels. For example, let's take the AC200P, AC200 Max, 100 Delta Pro or whatever, 145 volt capacity. That's what, 5 panels, 20, 40, 60, 80, 120. They don't sit right at 20 volts. So you could kind of push it to 6, maybe, but you got to have a voltmeter and test all of that stuff. So you got 6 of those dips. But let's say you got a ton of 100 watt panels for some odd reason. You can't go more than 6 there either, and you'll have less power than if you had 200 watt panels. So you got 6 200 watt panels, or you got 6 100 watt panels. There's a difference between 600 watts and 1200 watts on paper, of course. And then we talk about cables and such. For most people, unless you're putting a bunch of panels in parallel, and specifically, I would say 200 watt panels in parallel, you typically don't need 10 gauge cables unless you're going to be going very long, 50, 60. I think Jason may have talked about once you get past about 50 foot, then you may have to start going down in your gauge cable to accommodate all the current, which is the volts and the amps that's coming through that cable. I don't know enough about that to speak to that, so I'm going off of third-hand information. But for most people with these power stations that we have, 12 gauge cable, as long as it's a shorter run, you should be fine with a 12 gauge cable. Now, bonus thing, let me just roll on back here. I got a package today. I ordered that Ecoflow River 2 Max deal with the free panel. I did. And this is the free panel. It came today. I don't particularly at the moment care about the panel, but I just couldn't pass up the deal. Now, I will also tell you another secret. I got a much better deal on it because I'm a part of the Ecoflow group and I was paying attention in that group. So what happened was the $420 deal. Thank you very much. Oh, wow. Jeez. $50. That feels good. I don't want to get all giddy, but I'm giddy inside. Thank you very much. I appreciate that very much. Please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions, and I will help you directly. I was in the Ecoflow group. It's pretty dope. I was in the Ecoflow group, and they had an 8% off coupon, which the $420 deal for the River Max 2 was already a really good deal for a power station just in and of itself. Because typically, even though we find deals on power stations, they're typically cheaper power stations. We kind of roll a dice on that for saving the coin, but we still are in a place where we're looking at about 80 cents per watt hour. So to have that to be 420, it was a compelling device, especially for the features that it had. Now, to give you the free panel, a 110 watt panel, which typically is $2 per watt, was a great deal in and of itself. And then somebody posted about, like, yeah, if you still have your 8% off coupon from the previous post, you could save even more money. So, y'all, the moral of this story, before I tell you how much I spent, is if you're on Facebook, join those groups, because you, especially Ecoflow, Blue Eddy sometimes too, they'll give stuff away. But Ecoflow is pretty, I think, generous at times with their group members. To give you an example, that Ecoflow River, the first one, after I bought one for $280, maybe like 2 months later, they were selling it in the group for people for $199. Join the groups. So with the 8% off, I didn't pretend to care about the math, but once I put that coupon in, I got that panel, 110 watt panel, $2 per watt, a Ecoflow River 2 Max, 512 watt hours of capacity for $360. I was literally debating on whether I should buy it. I was talking to my wife about it, and she was like, $400, 420, then plus tax and all that jazz. She was like, I wouldn't do it. And I didn't want to do it. Now, every now and then I am the beneficiary of monetary kindness from a viewer or two. Shout out to Jimmy Lee. So I have some extra coins on hand to be able to make a purchase less painful. So it has to get to my threshold of being like worth it. Sometimes I do stuff for the culture. Like I purchased the EB3A just for, for the culture, for solar. It was like $210. I'm not, but I bought one. So to get this for $360, the only way I was gonna buy it in my mind is if I could have got some help from like one of my viewers who is incredibly kind to me. I appreciate it very, very much, to drop the price down. Because until I get the subscriber count that appeals to these companies, then I have to buy some stuff. Now I can make videos about stuff without having it, but sometimes it's good to have it too. It just depends on the type of video it is. So I did get that dip. It is coming soon. The power station came recently. Now, here's the thing that I'm shocked by. I'm not shocked by it. I was a little disappointed. This solar panel did not have a MC4 to XT60 connector in it. I didn't really expect it to have one because it's an older panel. That panel has been out for like at least 2 years now. But because they're not putting the cable in the box of the power stations anymore, I may have to like in the groups, like see if they can send me one. Cause it's like, I bought this joint, I got a deal on it, but I still bought it. So it's like, man, can you send me a cable, please? Let me see what y'all snapping and trapping about. Man, thanks so much, Jimmy. I appreciate that greatly. I appreciate that greatly. Somebody, I think it was Michael Blackstock, paid me a really good compliment, where he called me the MKBHD of solar. My quality ain't there yet, but I think my plain speak and my practical approach to these devices is certainly a goal of mine to be as influential, as helpful, and as like just like base informative as it relates to solar, like the good brother Marquez Brownlee is, for sure. I know, right? Isn't that dope? Man, saying people who share their coins, man, y'all are wonderful people. I think 10 gauge MC4 cables can handle about 25 to 30. Huh? Everybody else is wonderful too, my wife is saying. And I agree. Those of you who hang out with me and you spend your time is currency as well. I greatly appreciate that. But sharing them coins hit a little different. Let's see what band everything is saying. So that's okay. 10 gauge MC4 cables can handle about 25 to 30 amps. So that's confusing since my charge controller is 60 amps. So I have to run several cables to a combiner box, then larger wire to the controller. That's why I don't DIY right there. That's exactly a reason, because that went right over my head. What's up, Dean? I'm looking at the thumb count. There's 20 of us watching now, so to help Ask Ive out. Those that do not do so, yes, please make sure to smash the thumb button. The thumb, what's the thing? The like button. Yeah, do that. Do that for Ask Ive. If you're not into it, I get it. No pressure. But if it's nothing if it doesn't matter to you, go ahead and press it. The great thing now, Ask Guys, is you have no power outage worries and save money on your electric bills. We had a storm a week ago. I used my 300 amp hour. That thing is massive. Life PO4 and 2000 watt inverter to use my microwave. What'd you warm up in your microwave, man? What did you burn that power on? I remember when you bought your first solar panel, and now you have one. Now you are way ahead of me. Man, that 50 watt panel, I still have it. It's outside right now with the Go Labs R300 on it. At some point, because winter sun is so stingy, I have had, it's a video coming out soon. I have had every single panel I own outside on the power station. Every single one. And I made a video. It will go up on Patreon first, and then I'll share it with the community at large. Hopefully I could get a good thumbnail for it, because that plays a big role in whether or not people click the video, no matter how interesting it is. Outside of the die-hard people, you guys watch the videos, and I appreciate it greatly. Instant coffee and some food. Hey, all about the coffee, right? So let me tell you, let's just talk about it. The reason why I like the River 2 Max so much. One, it's LiFePO. So 3,000 cycles and all that jazz. Let me, I got the little thumbnail around here. I keep calling it a thumbnail. The infographic. I'll pull it up. Shoot, where'd my mouse go? I think it thinks I have 3 monitors here. Where's Zoom at, my friend? I made a whole video about these River 2 series where we talked about it in detail. But just because I have one coming, let's go ahead and delve in a little bit. Let's hide my face. Oh, my face can stay there. Because we don't care about the River 2 base model at the moment. Can I just say, people keep talking about the River 2 and saying it charges fast. That's the reason why I went to it. The EB3A charges fast too, and it can take in more solar power. Now, the River 2 has bidirectional charging, but it's 60 watts. I'm not crazy about that. Any type of bidirectional charging is good, but 100 watts is perfect for me. I'm like, yeah, y'all know the EB3A charges fast too. It charges up in about an hour as well. And it can charge actually faster because you could put it on turbo. They recommend you don't put it on turbo a lot unless there's an emergency situation. But it just feels like Ecoflow's propaganda or whatever, their marketing is just kind of, has people swooning. But I'm like, the EB3A, for whatever issues it has, it charges fast too. But people name that as the reason why they went with the Ecoflow River 2. Anyway, Ecoflow River Max, 512 hours of power, 600 watt inverter. They say 660, which is interesting. I'm sorry, 660 watts charging. That's the AC input. 0 to 100 in about 60 minutes, which is dope. I dig that 100%. The thing that matters to me the most is the solar input, which is a leap for a 500 watt hour device because it can take in up to 50 volts. I think that that's dope. It has a 13 amp input limit and it could take in up to 220 watts. I feel like that Pro should have been able to take in more power. It should have probably went up to a higher voltage or be able to take in more watts. I don't know why the Pro and the Max have the same amount of capacity, especially since they're going in this tiered approach for these. Like the River 2 base model is like really like, it's kind of, I don't know the right word to say. It's underpowered. The River 2 is a nicer jump. The River 2 Pro is a nicer jump, but only in everything else except for the solar. The main takeaway feature for me is I like the 220 watts, but I like the fact that it has a bi-directional 100 watt PD port. That's pretty much a game changer for me in my zone one with my TV is, because the biggest issue that I've had in that area, which doesn't quite solve completely, is watt hour capacity. But with this, I don't have to go through and jump through any hoops to get more power into this device to make it last throughout the night. So if I have a 500 watt hour capacity Ecoflow River 2 Max in my zone one with my TV, I can easily grab my Dr. Prepare, my Ampere Time, another power station, get one of my little trusty adapters. This one is not 100 watt rated, I don't believe. If it is, it sucks. This is the Voltabius 12 volt adapter. It is rated at 100 watts on the ports, so I can easily charge and power dump into that dip. It doesn't do it the whole time. It drops down to 60. Some of the other ones do that too, but it's just not reliable. This is actually a replacement too, but that's a whole nother story. I can power dump into that dip super easily. And if I have a power station that has a one-way port, like let's say the EB3A, it's only 250 some odd watt hours, but that could get me through the night. Let's not trip. It's only 256 watt hours, but it has a one-way port. Then I don't have to bother with this stuff. I can just plug it right in, boom, bap. It's getting more power, can last longer throughout the night, keep my internet running. I'm excited about that. That could possibly be a situation where I have one power station over there. Now, my power station situation is changing, and I am thinking about bringing a bigger power station up to this zone right here, which is my work area. This is currently occupied by the EB70. It's going to be fun kind of figuring all of that stuff out. As we talked about, the main point of this joint is how to pair your solar panels with your power station strategically so you're getting the best bang for this money that you spent. I'm thinking about bringing a bigger one up here, and that'll probably happen. It just depends on whether or not I get this next power station and it has the higher volt input limit. Now, I am on the road to 10,000 subs. I have some video ideas that may push me closer to that. But I'm going at a steady pace. I get about 150 subscribers per month. So it's slow going, but I'm going to get there. Now, the interesting takeaway for you guys that I think, okay, well, let me just say for me, another reason why I like that Ecoflow River 2 Max, because of that bi-directional charging, you have 3 ways that you can charge it. Now, they can't charge at the same time. I feel like that was a dropped ball. It would have been great if they could dual charge or triple charge, but it's not necessarily necessary. But because you can charge from AC, then you could charge from solar. You don't have to take your solar cable out to charge from 12 volt. You can just go right to the USB-C port and charge from 12 volt. I don't like XT60 because, again, watt hour being my limitation, if I wanted to power dump into that power station to keep my internet or TV going longer, I would have to unplug the XT60 connector, get the 12 volt connector, plug that XT60 in, which is not the biggest deal. I don't like doing it, but then I have to remember in the morning to unplug the XT60 again, put the solar XT60 back in so they can start getting solar. I've had it happen to me a time or 2 or 3 where I didn't remember to do that and I wasn't getting any power. That's the problem with power stations and such that only have 1 or 2 ways to charge them. So having multiple ways to charge is a good look. That's another reason why I like the Ecoflow River 2 Max. It's going to be a really good, capable device. Right now in that area, I have my original OG Ecoflow River. It's not LiPo. It can take in up to 200 watts of solar, which is cool. That is what power dumps into my EB3A, which runs my internet because I like to have a cushion. We talked about that in the last live. but having this particular device be over there in that area is going to be really interesting. And because it has the 50-volt input limit, I'm not saying I will want to do this, but if I needed to put 2 panels in series, I could. That's it. You can't go much higher than that. You just get 2 panels. You only get 2 shots. Do not miss your chance to blow. Is there anything else here that kind of works in my favor? I'm excited about it. And what that does is that puts me in a situation where now the Ecoflow comes out of that zone. The Ecoflow can be charged fast via AC, which is ideal in a situation where I have my Alcatel and my Ace Volt. It's important as it relates to these bigger power stations, Alcatel, Ace Volt, AC200P, AC200 Max, because they typically have higher voltage batteries in them. The DC is not more efficient than the AC. So I could power dump from those devices into my EB3A, my Ecoflow River, which both take just plain AC cables, and me not see a hit in efficiency because I'm using AC. It's like it's going to be 80% period. What they tell you is if you're using AC, subtract or divide your watt hour, whatever, by 20% or 80% or whatever. What I do is I just think about what my watt hour capacity of my power station is from the get-go. I just take 20% off the top of that, and then that tells me how much time I'll have to be able to use that thing to run AC, because AC efficiency is about 80%. So you're going to lose 20% running on AC. But now with these power stations, you're going to lose 20% on DC as well. And in some instances, I've been banging this drum, the AC is more efficient than the DC, which is it's bananas. Bananas. All right, let's see here. I'm kind of waiting for the River 2 Pro. The River 2 Pro's price is going to be interesting. We'll see how that goes. Y'all should move out here for sun. Yeah, but then we'd be hot all the time. I don't know if I'm into that. But back to that River Pro. The River Pro would be a more ideal situation there because, again, you know, what did we learn today, right? A 200 watt panel is going to produce about 1,000 watt hours. So having 700 in whatever it is, 256, 512, 768, I believe. Having that would be a better pairing. Still not ideal, but a better pairing for a 200 watt panel. When I get that River 2 Max, I'm still going to have to power dump, but I'll be able to have a load on it. So it's going to be fun to see if the 20 watts from my internet, the 40 watts from my TV will kind of leave me in a more balanced state. I got 140 coming in, 60 going out. At the end of the day, how am I looking on my power station? Oh my gosh. Michael Ealy is very excited over there. My wife is watching whatever show that is with him in it, the lawyer show. But that 768 watt hours would be a good companion or a better companion. I'll tell you what's perfect for over there would be that Ecoflow Delta 2. Ecoflow don't rock with your boy though. You know what I mean? They don't. That $8.99 deal with the 2 free panels was interesting, but it was way too rich for my blood, as they say. But it was a good look. I'm over 100 watt panels, but maybe I could have sold them to drop the price on them or use them in some type of situation. It's interesting times ahead. That's for sure. I am going to be making a lot of videos, casual videos. They will go over to Patreon. Some may be behind the paywall. It's only like $3 a month. Not trying to compel people or anything like that. Some won't be behind the paywall. They'll just be generally available. But the reason why I push content over there is because some content is not primed for YouTube. And if I didn't have the Patreon, I wouldn't do anything with the videos. I'd probably record them and not put them out. Because in this stage of growing, you have to be very intentional with the content that you put out. Because if you put out a couple like misses, then YouTube doesn't penalize you per se, but YouTube follows the viewer. So if you had a certain percentage of your people watching your videos and then you put out 3 like, you know, losers, and then they stop. YouTube will probably stop showing your next few videos to those people until you put out like 3 more bangers and then you got more people in. I'm not saying that's an exact science, but YouTube follows the viewers. So those videos that are super casual, unless there's a way for me to package them up, I probably just wouldn't put them out. Patreon allows me to put them out for people who are like really into solar and want to support the channel on a monthly basis. And sometimes I do put those out on a community tab, or I will share them not behind the Patreon paywall. But I have plans over there starting at $3. So I need to revamp those to more accurately depict what you get, because most of it is just exclusive content. As the community grows, maybe we'll have live specific videos for Patreon viewers. Some people who are over there, they get to reach out and directly. Anybody can reach out and contact me. I don't want you guys to think that I'm putting that kind of stuff behind there. But in the future, as time becomes more limited, then I'll be able to prioritize the people who support monetarily. But I'm here to help. I'm here for the community, man. It's funny because I appreciate that about myself. I love that people can reach out and they can get an answer relatively quickly. As the community grows, that'll be harder, but take advantage of it now. If you got questions, reach out. I've called a couple people or text them and email. We figure it out, or we do voice notes on Instagram or Telegram. It's a good time. Anywho, did you guys have any questions? Let me see what y'all snapping and trapping about. Okay. My understanding is that I don't have an idea, but the River 2 is having some issues or something like that. So they had to push it back. Appreciate that, Fortune. Thank you very much. Okay, we talked about that. Sometimes you need that fast charging available when there are only short periods of full sun during power outages. Absolutely. But slower charging should be used otherwise to keep the battery healthy. I don't know if I care about battery health for LiFePo. I don't think I do. But to make your money go as long as possible, I guess that's fine. It's kind of like the idea. It's not exactly the same, but when we got new shoes for school, a rule is for a lot of people, specifically in the Black community, because I'm a part of the Black community. And I imagine it goes for poor people probably as well, is when you got new shoes for school, you take off your school shoes, you go outside and play in your play shoes. So you get longer run time. But if you wanted to be fly and your parents didn't have that limitation on you, then you wear your fly sneakers around the community. They wouldn't last as long, but then the impact of having your fly sneakers on would be a good look. So it's like, yeah, your battery, you can baby it and make it last longer, but you can also use it and get the benefits of being able to use it. So I don't know if I care about that as it relates to LiFePo batteries. It's just like, I don't baby them at all. Let's see, my 500 watt, whatever that is, power station was charging at 190 watts with 2 100 watt panels in parallel. Kind of worries me because I don't know if that's safe, but it charges fast. Yeah, you got to be careful with them cheaper power stations because they don't have a lot of those protections in there. So that's why when we were talking about the amps and stuff like that, you have to be mindful of that. I think Setite has a myelin still, and it can take in a crazy amount of power. The device in and of itself could take in a crazy amount of power. It could triple charge or it double charged, but at like 100 and something watts from the 5525 port and like 90 watts from the USB-C port. And that just felt like a lot. But, what do I know? I have a 1-up and a 110 panel, but it never gets more than 70 and it takes 10 hours or more. So I just plug it in when I start the generator, and it takes 1 to 2 hours to charge. Oh, you calling the power station a generator? That threw me off because, yeah. Anyway, I don't care about that whole argument, but I thought gas generator. So I start the generator, and it takes 1 to 2 hours to charge 100%. I got you. Cow dog connoisseur. Nice, made it 2 in a row. There you go, winning. What's your setup like now, Cow dog connoisseur? I know you mentioned you had bought. I think you bought like another Delta. I know you had the Delta Mini. And I think he bought a Delta 1300 or something. What's going on there? But without power, we just have the cheap boxes and generator. I got you. Wow, ban everything. Is that a normal blah, 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 blah? Right, she out here. MJ say, hey, Del, I see you with that Michael Ealy. Oh, she must be in that sleep then, because she didn't respond at all. So she knocked out. She's been having long nights lately. She's she's not starting. My wife is a stay-at-home mom, and she's an entrepreneur, but she'll say like she's a mompreneur, and she's getting back into her services that she's offering and stuff like that. She's also a creative, very much so. She has written a book, a great book, by the way. It's called Learning to Live Loved. Um, Something that I feel like her byline is like how a fatherless girl became a Christian woman. She grew up without her biological father and all that jazz, and she wrote a really good book about it. Y'all, I don't know if y'all know this about me, but if it wasn't good, I'd be like, it's okay, but it's really good. But I picked a dope woman. You know what I mean? Everything she does is dope. 1,000. Not sure what that's in reference to. You're talking to. We appreciate you. I appreciate that. I appreciate your appreciation. Oh, I was just saying when I was talking about like being here for you guys to reach out to. I I was actually just talking with a cousin of mine. He was interviewing me about my career path and all that jazz. And when I interview, I'm in the tech industry, IT support, whatever, whatever. More so on the softer skills side than like the technical, like nerdy side. And one thing when I interview is I tell people, because customer service is really important. I tell people I just treat people how I want to be treated, man. I got to call Comcast and Cox KY Fios now, T-Mobile, Verizon, whoever. It's like I treat people the way that I want to be treated. I want to feel like you understand my issue and you're trying to solve it and not being flippant about it. So that's how I try to treat my comment section. When I have a comment, I'm uneasy about something because I'm a rookie or a novice. It feels good when people get back to you, and very often they do not. So I pride myself on being able to try and help out as much as my capacity can take. Somebody was at the house yesterday, one of Dell's clients, friend, associates, or whatever, and we were able to square away some technical stuff for her. You know what I mean? It's just like I enjoy helping. Yes, LiPo batteries can handle faster charging. All right. That's something I said MJ agrees with. We were poor. We were poor. There were play clothes and shoes. I dig that. That's for sure. I have a gas. Okay, you have a gas generator. Okay. Dean. I bought the River 2. Love it. Not sure if I would go with the River Pro next or the Delta 2. I would say if the River 2 Max is 420, the River 2 Pro is probably going to be 5 something. Let's think about that for a second. 700 watt hours. I think the inverter is a little better. I still have it here. Let's take a look. Inverter is 800 watts. AC output, yes, 800 watts. So where I'm going with this is, let's say you got 2 of those instead of the River 2. You would have 2 800-watt inverters. You would have 2 zones covered in your house to be able to pull in up to 200 watts of solar, 220 to be technical. 768 watt hours, so 1500, 1540 to, and she done got kidnapped. 1540 probably is a closer joint for about $1,000. I would say it depends on your needs. I lean towards the Delta 2 really because it's that 1800 watt hour capacity on the inverter, and I think that that's really important. Oh snap, Michael Ealy done. Jeez, he out here thugging. It's an interesting kind of situation to have to deal with. Whether to spend $1,000 or spend maybe about 550, 570. I wonder how much they're gonna price it at. Because if the 500 is 420, then that would beg to reason that the 700 would probably be 6. But then you have to deal with the fact that the Ecoflow River Pro, the first one, went on sale at Costco all the time. So what are they going to do with this introductory price? I imagine it's going to have to be about five something. And it probably will live at $5.99, what, $6.20? I don't know. Oh, wow. I respect that. I'm so proud. Yeah, she's very talented, man. Incredibly. I have read and loved Dell's book. It is good. I know, right? The first half of it, the first half of her book is an absolute page turner because it's about her journey, like the finding out where her father lives for the first time, realizing that he only lived like 15, 20 minutes away or something like that her whole life, and going to confront him with the kind of attitude that typically, young abandoned kids, I would say specifically women, have towards their fathers. And like that process and what happened. And, she was kind of wanting to show off. And, she walked into this situation that was just, I don't want to give it away, but it's like her first half of her book is about that. And then the second half of the book is really about like practical, not tips, but her putting on her research brain and as it relates to the impacts of fatherlessness and how that impacts your relationship with your heavenly father. We are Christians, so we believe, God Father, God the Father, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit. So how can you have this relationship with this God who's not visible in heaven, when you don't have these reference point with your earthly father? Now she has a godfather who is her dad. Um, and, thank God for him for stepping in and filling in the gap to give her that fatherhood experience. But it's an excellent book. Excellent. And she operates in the spirit of excellence, not perfection, excellence. So she did it and she did it well. Let's see. Is there a place to buy her book? It's on Amazon. I'm a child of an alcoholic and would love to purchase one. Yeah, it's on Amazon. It's called Learning to Live Love. If you want one directly from her, Cow Dog Connoisseur, she will ship you one and she'll sign it. The same goes for you, MJ. Sharon, if you want one that's signed from her, just let us know. We'll figure it out. But she has hardback and paperback, and she'll sign them and send you a copy. Excellent. I'm super proud of her. Not proud in a shock way, but proud in a like, man, you did it. You set out to do something and you did it. She's very much that way. She sets out to do stuff and she does it. Ron, I'm glad you were born. I'll take that. Thank you. I'm glad I was too. Let's see. That's where I got my River Pro and extra battery and 160 watt panel. Costco's amazing deal. They're selling them at Sam's Club too. I've seen from time to time people posting the Ecoflow group that Sam's Club has gotten Ecoflow or two. Somebody told me about a deal. Shoot, they just commented on the video saying that a 700 some odd watt hour device was on sale somewhere. I know Black Plumber said what he said in the comments. Somebody commented earlier that it was about $300. Maybe I can find that real quick. Excuse me. Let me introduce me. I'm at 6,750 subscribers. How about that? Brother Paycheck. Let's see. Who said that? Who said that? The problem with this, I may have to look at my phone. The problem with the YouTube website is that when you go, it shows you the most latest comments as it relates to the videos. But then if you go on the app, you can see the comments as they kind of came in. I have a suggestion, blah, 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 blah. Oh, D-Mac. D-Mac was very generous. Thank you so much. Send me a CashApp. Somebody sent me a Venmo. Thanks, Dean. I appreciate that. Shout out to Dean saying sharing them coins with me. Okay. I'm just trying to find this deal. Okay, it was Ace Marcola. So the River Max Plus, $350. Sam's Club, 200. 2021, the white one, 720 watt hours, 800 charge to 80%. Comes with the extra battery installed. So they're just saying the Max Plus. I guess it's it's not the base model. So it's 360 plus 360 is 720. So River Max Plus, Sam's Club, they're typically on sale at Costco. Um, oh, man, mommy's managing something. So there you go. There's a deal on Sam's Club for $360. That's funny. Power Rangers, DMAC. Let's see. Okay, I'll let her know. Hey, babe. Um, Sharon or Sharfar made. I think she would like a signed copy of your book. She said she bought it and it was a great book. So we're going to have to figure it out. Can I Yeah, I talk with her in Messenger all the time. So that's easy. MJ is probably going to try and buy a copy. I told Cow Dog Connoisseur that she could probably get I don't know. I don't know. You came up. MJ said, "Hey." She was like, "Yeah, I see you over there watching whatever Michael Ealy stuff going on." And I had passed a message on to you, but you were asleep. So I feel like you came up in that capacity. My wife is very appreciative. Day one fishing. What's going on, man? Always good to see you. What's up? I'm thinking of jumping to the EB240 for 1,000 on Amazon. Interesting. The 1,000 watt inverter is all I really need. The power storage is what I'm after. What do I think? My question is, have I seen that cheaper? I don't know if I'm thinking refurbished or not, but I just wonder if I've seen it cheaper. The EB240, which is 2.4 kilowatts on paper for $1,000, 1,000 watt inverter, up to 500 watts of solar input. It's an interesting device, especially if you're after the watt hour capacity. Now, let me think about that for a second because 2.4, that's compelling. I'll tell you why. Because you think about, let's say, Ampere Time or Dr. Prepare, 1,280 watt hours for around $400. So you could get 2.4, kilowatts of power for about $800. But then you have to buy the battery charger, right? Battery charger is $100. I think I'm inviting you to spend your coins, sir. What else do we have? No, wait. You got the Cell and some of the power stations like it that are at like $1,150. That's 2,000 watt hours, 2,000 watt inverter, 500 watts of solar, two USB-C 100 watt ports, 6 outlets, nice screen, UPS, fast charge at 1,100 watts. I think you should probably entertain taking a chance on one of those devices. I talked about the Cell on the last live. Let me know what you think, man. I would take a risk on the Cell over the $1,000 EB240. That's where I'm at with it. Let me see if I could find it and pull it up. We could talk about that too, since that came up. The Cell limited time deal, 1145. It's sold by a couple of different people, which I don't know why they do that. That raises a bit of a flag for me. I just gotta be frank. Um, Let's pull this for a second, a hot one. So look at that, man. 2,000. So that's close to what you can spend. 2,000 watt hours. Hey, Baptized, it's been a minute. What you think, man? Give me some feedback here. Oh, man. Has a weird XT60 connector, 5521 ports. The EB240 does not have 5521 ports. It has all slow USB ports and only a 45 watt PD port. I know you said the 1,000 watt inverter is fine for you. This one has a 2,000 watt inverter, 6 outlets. I don't know. Okay, ban everything is saying. Let's drop this down. You could buy a 300 amp hour ampere time, a Power Queen with 3.8 kilowatt capacity for about $1,000 and a 20 amp AC charger for about $100. But then he can't charge it with solar. He had to buy an MPPT charge controller. So that's adding another, what, 50, 60, depending on how nice you go. Maybe I don't typically price charge controllers, but that's a compelling joint as well. But then he lacks ease of everything. That thing is, the battery is going to be huge. No handle. You know, they come with little straps and stuff. Straps on the side on those 300 amp hour joints. It's going to be heavy. He is going to get some weight with the 240 because it's not LiFo. 1,000 cycles for the whatever cells they have in there, the pouch cells. Interesting. And then it also depends on his situation. I know he has like a panel on his car, so he's moving and shaking, and maybe a little easier to move and shake with that EB240, and plus have it around the house because then he has 2 zones now, or he can swap out his joints where it's like one is charging using the other one's charging using that one. Now the grease cell charges at 1,100 watts. The 240s probably charge at what, like 200, 260 something? I don't think they charge any higher than that. The AC 200P is like $1,300 now, which is interesting. It doesn't float my boat. The AC 200 Max is $1,700, so a difference of $400. Which I don't know if those upgrades are worth that. I suppose. I'm not sure. That's something to think about that I don't have the capacity for at the moment. If you don't mind, what area do you reside in? She's in the Midwest. I'll let her answer. I recently got an AC 500 300S combo and a couple PS70s. Really nice. That's a good look. Oh, and the Blue Eddy. Oh, you gave me some of your joints. Let me see. Okay. We have the Ecoflow Delta 1000, the Delta Mini, 2 HQST 100 watt panels, 1 New Power 9BB 200 watt panel. Thanks to you guys and your hands-on help for us all. We're ready this time around. That's nice. That's awesome. In the EB3A, I gotcha. Okay. Still looking at which panel I'm going to use to power the beast. Oh man, that's a good time. Those dual MPPTs. The good thing about, okay, let's just talk about this AC situation. Good thing about those devices is they have the dual MPPTs, but then you have the DC optimizers that add more solar to your situation, which I think is very compelling. But for me, then I would have to run an extra cable into my garage, which I'm willing to do, but I'm trying to get my cables down. So because I have power stations that can, because there's a potential for me to have a power station that could take in more voltage, I won't have to have my efforts split in the same zone. But if I needed to, let's say I have a situation where I either got a DT optimizer, or if I'm in your situation, you got the AC 500, AC 300, whatever, you have a situation where you can have one array facing. Basically, what I'm getting at is it allows you to have a similar situation to what you get when you parallel panels. When you have a series parallel connection, if this array gets shade on it and this array is in parallel, they have the ability to still produce power separately versus everything being in series, treated as one array, treated as one panel, for lack of a better, phrase. And then if you have any shade, then the whole string is impacted by that shade. With the AC300, you have the ability to create one array that sits on its own, however you have it configured, series, all panels. And you have a way to plug in a second array unimpacted by the first array. I think that that's dope. The AC300 is like, it's one of my, it's like my dream device, I would say. The AC500, it's more capacity with those funky plugs on it that I would never use. And it's what I mean when I say it's more capacity is the inverter is bigger. Let me tell you something. I got beef with Blue Eddy, just to keep it a buck. Because they have these devices on sale for $1 a watt. And I mentioned this before, but like, bruh, that's going rate. $1 a watt is going rate. How you gonna give me 3,000 watt hours for $3,000 and call it a sale? I don't get that. I don't know that device is. I mean, it's a really dope device. I don't know. I don't like that. I don't feel great about that. Let's see. Okay. I thought Ask I was near New Orleans. It was sending him hurricane warnings. Yeah, I'm from New Orleans, but I live up in Pennsylvania. Okay, yeah, you said that. Okay, I got that. I'm paranoid about hurricanes because we got hit by some bad ones here since 2008. I ain't mad at that. I'm glad I don't have to pay attention to hurricanes anymore. Just saw you already said that. Okay, cool. They went fishing. I dig it. I definitely have some things to consider. Man, you could reach out, hit me up if you want to be like toss it back and forth. I go back and forth on so much stuff. So much stuff. That River 2 Max, I went back and forth on that a lot. But then that coupon kicked in and it was like 360. Oh yeah, that's a no-brainer. 360 just for the power station was a no-brainer for the most part. But to get the panel too, that's ridiculous. I hope it stands the test of time. They also have crazy warranties on them. They're like 5-year warranties. So even if you have a problem with one, you're covered. Ecoflow ain't going nowhere no time soon. Not at all. Quick joint. I am giving away this joint. I talked about it on the last one. It's going to be in a regular video. You're just going to have to watch the video. The video is not going to be about this. But in that video, I'm going to have something that I speak to about giving this away. This is the Alcatel P501. That one is going. I find myself not using it, even though, let me tell you something. This would be a good companion to the Ecoflow River 2 Max if I ever got to the point where it got too full. The reason why is because this USB-C 100 watt PD port is not bidirectional. So if I found myself in a situation where, let me just give you a glimpse into how my mind works. If I find myself in a situation where the Ecoflow River 2 Max at 500 some odd watt hours was full, I could power dump into this using AC, which is not ideal on an Ecoflow River 2 Max. It's better on some of my bigger power stations. It can charge from AC at 125 watts. So it's a good power dump, right? And then I power dump that power into it because it does not have a bidirectional port. I just plug it right back into the Ecoflow, allow it to get that 100 watts, makes the device last longer throughout the night. But I'm still going to get rid of it. I have other power stations I can do that with, but not as easily as that one. That one is one of the few ones that doesn't have a bidirectional joint, that has 500 watt hours of capacity, that charges from AC. That's not a Pro. I wish it had ability to charge over USB-C. I just love the ability to charge over USB-C. It's really convenient. Even though AC wall charging is faster, you find yourself traveling with one of your power stations and it can charge over USB-C, then you don't have to bring your power cable with it. And God forbid you have one of those things that has one of those big old power bricks. You don't have to bring that if you have USB-C charging. It's not as fast, but 100 watts is fine. You have it charged up 300 watt hours in 3 hours. I think that's a good look. All right, folks. If y'all don't have no questions, I'll check the last few comments. I think this was a great chat. Thank you guys for hanging out and spending time. We'll wrap it up. I don't think I forgot anything. I'm still considering getting one of the Ecoflow dual fuel generators as well and using propane in the event of not being able to charge the system due to lack. Setai's thing is he's really into that dual fuel generator. I'm not a generator guy, but I think that it's very cool that it has that dual fuel situation. I don't. Would you? I guess would you want to get that one instead of any other that was dual fuel? I would have to, and I'm not going to do it. I told him he needs to do it. He could even come on this live stream and do it and talk about the implications of that. Whether or not the Ecoflow one is better, I don't know. Just hit me up on Instagram and we'll figure it out. We could exchange the funds and then they'll sign it up and ship it out to you. You don't even have to go through Amazon because there's no way for her to really sign it if you go through Amazon. Hey, what's happening? Groggy? Okay. Thank you. This was good. One last thing. We have 2 channels. 3 eventually. We still suck. And it's mainly because of Dell. I'm just going to put her out there. We have our family channel, which is called The Riches Revealed. We have a live stream channel that's going to be like a generic one. The Riches Revealed is about family related stuff. I've said that. And then we're also going to have a marriage channel. A few of you guys are subscribed to our family channel. I want to try and go live on that more, but we have to find a more comfortable setting for the missus because she doesn't like this setup because she's a hater. So that's the one thing that it's just all these hurdles I got to deal with her. It's like, want to go live, she don't feel like going live. Now it's like, the reason I don't feel like going live is because I don't like the setup. Whatever. Thug life. Then we have the live stream channel, which is just us kind of shooting the breeze. It could be about anything, just you get the wonderful dynamic of Ivan Dell on various topics. I just had a post on social media about this chick Glorilla, and it was a mean post. I'm just not a fan of her music, and I'm not a big music head or anything like that. Anyway. So somebody on a post, she called me like anti-black. I'm not sure what she said. It was a stupid thing to say, but anyway. And then the marriage thing is going to be about married life and us having candid conversations around that subject matter. Not necessarily seeking to help people, but inadvertently help by sharing our particular struggles, triumphs, and challenges, and whatever we deem it to be. So that's The Riches Revealed is a family channel. The second channel is called TRR Live, which will be hard to find. What I'll do is I'll try to put links below in the description. And then we'll have the marriage podcast, which you can't quite find, but it'll be called First Comes Marriage. I've heard my GoLabs charges fast with USB. Fastest? Where's GoLabs? Where's my mouse? See, I've heard good things, positive things about dual fuel. CA banning gas gens in 2025. That's interesting. I saw that now Los Angeles has a black mayor, and I was just thinking, like, how much stuff they're gonna blame her for now? Thanks, Fortune. I appreciate that. What makes the generator cool is it will turn itself on when your delta gets low, but the person who mentioned it doesn't have the Ecoflow. They have the AC 300. So that's why I was thinking about the benefits of it and all that jazz. Got an idea to float to you about an additional channel idea, bro. Is there an email I may send it to? Yeah. All of the information is in this. It'll be in this live stream down at the bottom about how to contact me. My email is solarquestions@askive.com though, but it's in the description. All right, beautiful people. I can hang out and continue to hang out, but I don't have nothing else to talk about. So we're gonna go ahead and get the day going. Not going, but get on with the day. Y'all be beautiful. Until next time.